Good morning. Welcome to day 4 of the hearing in the matter of BG&E. This is a rate application, case number 9484. Welcome back, Mr. Bugelmans.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Chairman.
believe we've completed everybody else's witness testimony except yours. So
Okay.
it appears we have 2 witnesses left. Is that right, Mr. Lesky and Mr. Baudino?
Correct, Your Honor. And I believe the parties have agreed to stipulate Mr. Lenski, so he's not here today, and I was planning on just stipulating that. But Mr. Baudino is here.
Okay, let's call Mr. Baudino to the stand.
Okay.
You swear and affirm under the benefit of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in the matter of opinion is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good morning, Mr. Baudino.
Good morning.
Can you please state your full name and business title for the record?
Yes, my full name is Richard Baudino, and my title is consultant for J. Kennedy & Associates, Inc.
Thank you for that. Since you're likely a new face to some of the new commissioners here, could you please provide a brief overview of your experience and expertise?
Yes, sure. Just very briefly, I've been in utility regulation since 1982. I started up with the New Mexico Public Service Commission staff, worked for the staff for 7 years until 1989, which time I took a job with Kennedy & Associates in Atlanta, and I've been with Kennedy ever since then. I've testified in a broad range of different issues regarding electric and gas and water companies, having to do with rate of return, return on equity, rate design, cost allocation, and some also some limited finance and accounting issues. Testified in about 225 cases over that time. So that's kind of briefly a little bit of a summary of my professional background.
Thank you. In the binder before you, under the first tab, do you have a document entitled The Direct Testimony and Exhibits of Richard A. Baudino, dated September 14th, 2018, totaling 27 pages, inclusive of exhibits?
Yes, I have that.
Thank you. Your Honor, I'd like to request to mark this document as MEG Exhibit number 4.
So marked.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Baudino, you also have in the binder before you, in the second tab, a document entitled Rebuttal Testimony of Richard A. Baudino, dated October 12th, 2018, totaling 9 pages.
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd like to request to mark this document as MEG Exhibit number 5.
So marked.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Baudino, were both of these documents prepared by you or under your control?
Yes, they were.
If I were to ask you the questions in these documents again today under oath, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Thank you, Mr. Baudino. Your Honor, with that, I would respectfully request that the Commission move both documents into the record.
Seeing no objection, MEG's exhibits number 4 and 5 are moved into evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I have a few questions for Mr. Baudino I'd like to pose to him.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Baudino, did you have a chance to review the surrebuttal testimony of Staff Witness Cross and his response to the rebuttal of Ms. Fiery?
Yes, I did.
What is your conclusion with respect to Mr. Cross's response to Ms. Fiery?
Well, my response is this. Basically, Mr. Cross's response to Ms. Fiery confirms the reasonableness of using the 5-year average NCP for the weather-sensitive classes D and C in the class cost of service study. Referring to page 3, lines 28 through 30, Mr. Cross testifies as follows. BGE witness Fiery's statement that demands of the D and C classes are weather dependent will vary significantly with changes in the weather is true with respect to annual demand and annual heating degree days, HDDs. And Mr. Cross further testified that the NCP peak measure is not necessarily correlated with annual demand or HDDs, but he further testified on page 4, lines 2 and 3, that an otherwise mild winter may have a couple of extremely cold days, resulting in a relatively large peak measurement that resembles the peak of a consistently cold winter in which temperature did not vary much. And I agree that could happen. But what Mr. Cross is pointing out here is in fact that Schedule D, residential and C customers, peak demands do in fact vary with weather, and especially on extremely cold days. Ms. Firey's data in her exhibit LKF-4 clearly shows the variation in Schedule D and C's NCPs during the 5-year period of 2013 to 2017. And Ms. Firey produced additional evidence in her rebuttal testimony using daily heating degree days that confirms these classes' weather sensitivity, in my view. This also confirms what I consider to be just sort of basic common sense in terms of recognizing the fact that Schedules D and C are weather sensitive in terms of both annual consumption and peak demands for those two classes. Now, Ms. Firey's proposal will indeed produce a more stable demand allocation over time for these weather-sensitive classes, as well as a more stable allocation of BGE's cost of service for all customer classes, not just D and C. Ms. Firey noted in her direct testimony that D and C have revenues that are decoupled, and that a 5-year NCP average is more consistent with that revenue decoupling, which sort of evens out the revenue collection for these classes based on weather, and I would agree with her on that. It's important to consider that under the single year 2017 class cost of service that Mr. Cross supports, which is a warmer than normal year, the Schedule D residential class benefits from that class cost of service with a lower non-coincident peak allocator, resulting in a higher relative rate of return. That's their class return relative to the system average of 1.14. But, consider this also. If 2017 had been much colder and had a few extremely cold days, then that residential class non-coincident peak allocator would have been higher for that 1 year. And their relative class cost responsibility would be higher as well. Of course, if you have a 5-year average, you have a more, I think, stable allocation and would kind of even out those changes. So although I think residential benefited in 2017, that's only for that 1 year. It could be it certainly could be different in a colder year. Mr. Cross testified on page 4, lines 11 through 14 of his rebuttal, that the high degree of correlation between daily heating degree days and each day's peak hour demand that Ms. Firey included in her rebuttal testimony was unsurprising, since both classes tend to utilize natural gas for heating. They don't just tend to use it for heating. They use it for heating. I showed in my rebuttal table 1 that Schedule D customers, residential, use 80% of their yearly volumes in the 5 winter months, November through March. So to me, it just makes common sense that, again, Schedule D and C have weather-sensitive consumption, weather-sensitive non-coincident peaks, and that the company's proposed 5-year average of these non-coincident peaks for these classes is reasonable and should be approved in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Baudino. Did you also review the rebuttal testimony of Staff Witness Ward regarding revenue allocation?
I did.
What is your response to Ms. Ward's rebuttal?
I disagree with what Ms. Ward said in her rebuttal regarding BGE's plus or minus 10% band. She characterized it as being arbitrary. It is not arbitrary. It is based on judgment, though, which I agree with. And this plus or minus 10% band has been presented by BG&E pretty consistently over the years, and I've been involved in a fair number of BG&E cases over the years. Given, especially if you look at the single-year NCP, you see quite a change you could see quite a change from 1 year to the next. Mr. Manuel pointed out on pages 4 or 5 of his rebuttal that the relative rate of return for the IRS class has been above 1.0 for this case and the last case, using if you use 5-year NCP average. So in the last case,
Your Honor, we would object. Rejoinder is not in our schedule for this witness,
agree,
and
Mr.
we are going
Wall, I
way
would agree.
beyond.
Mr. Wilson, the question was response to Ms. Ward's rebuttal testimony. We're now discussing Mr. Manuel's testimony.
Okay.
We're trending a little bit outside the scope Mr. Bugelmans, do you have another question?
Mr. Baudino, do you have any further response to just Mrs. Ward's rebuttal to finish your thought?
And again, we would object to that, Your Honor.
Let me see what he said already. I believe the witnesses had an opportunity to respond to Ms. Ward's rebuttal regarding the band. I'd like to move on, Mr. Bugelmans.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I have no further questions then. The witness is available for cross-examination in your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bain, do you have any questions?
No questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Zarsky?
No questions, Your Honor. Thank
Mr.
you.
Wilson?
Your Honor, yes, just shortly. Mr. Baudino, you're aware that BG witness Fiery, who you've testified about here this morning, has testified both in her written testimony and in her live testimony before the commission that BG does not oppose the use of the staff's proposed cost of service study. Are you not aware of that?
I am aware of that. I think her preference still would be to use the 5 years, but they don't oppose staff's 1 year.
Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you. The company?
No questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Bugelmans, any redirect?
I have no redirect. Thank you.
Commissioners, Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Baudino, if you heard witness Cross for staff testify regarding the precedential nature of changing what is a long-standing policy principle with this commission and kind of the caution that he gives us with regard to being careful because this will transcend BG&E. It will potentially affect other utilities as well. You want to comment on that?
Sure. I think I did read Mr. Cross's testimony, and I can understand that's something that must be considered by the commission when changing something like this. What I would say in response to you, Commissioner, is that when you look at the results of the 5 year versus the 1 year, and the changes that has in relative class cost responsibility, and then what these customer classes are then responsible for in terms of their revenue increases, I think the company has met its burden, and to show that you're going to get a more stable revenue allocation year to year, rate case to rate case, using the 5 years than you will the 1 year. We've seen the 2017 class cost of service. It was a warmer than normal year. Schedule D's non-coincident peak, which is a major allocator for the fixed cost of this company, for BG&E, that allocator went down substantially. And as a result, their relative rate of return went up. You would expect that. Using a 5 year average would help even that out. We've also, Mr. Manuel brought out the fact that in the last case, Schedule IS was above its relative rate of return.
I understand your position on the proposal, I think. I'm asking about the policy precedent that we could be setting.
Sure.
And addressing that directly.
I think, I would suggest to you that you have enough evidence on the record to make a reasonable change and an evidence-based change on your policy for this policy proposal going forward. I think the results speak for themselves, if you will.
Thank you.
Any follow-up based on Commissioner O'Donnell's questioning?
No, Mr. Chairman.
No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Baudino. You are excused.
Thank you.
Mr. Bugelmans, do you have any additional witnesses to call?
I have no additional witnesses to call, but I should probably mark and enter in Mr. Lenski's testimony.
Please do.
So we could just do it, Mega Exhibit 6 and 7, so Lenski Direct would be Mega Exhibit 6, and then Lenski Server Bottle would be Mega Exhibit 7. With that, I would request to move those into evidence. Thank you.
Those items are marked, and seeing no objections, MEG 6 and 7 are moved into evidence.
Thank you.
That concludes the witness appearances. What other matters do we have before we conclude today? Mr. Gahagan.
Your Honor, one is the Company Exhibit 16, I'm sorry.
That's
was
right.
marked for identification, but has not been admitted into evidence. I've spoken with both Staff Counsel and the Office of People's Counsel. I'm afraid I've not had a chance to talk to Mr. Bugelman or the lawyer for the union, but we would ask that that be admitted into evidence at this time.
Does any party have objection to moving Company Exhibit 16 into evidence?
No objection.
No objection.
Okay. The spreadsheets, the updated spreadsheets represented in Company Exhibit 16 are moved into evidence. Any other items before we move to the briefing schedule? Have the parties agreed to a briefing schedule?
We have, Your Honor. We would propose November 30th for the initial briefs and December 7th for reply briefs.
All parties agree to that schedule? All right. Well, the commission will therefore adopt that schedule. Please be mindful of the page limits in our regulations and try to keep the reply briefs to a minimum if possible. Any additional matters before we conclude?
Just one, Your Honor, but it can be done off the record if you don't mind.
Thank you. This concludes the hearing in case 9484. Off the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just